Although it's true that all of Spidey's villains have gotten darker as the years have gone by, there are still a select few that stand out compared to the rest for being the absolute worst of the worst. The kind of villains that wouldn't look out of place in a Ghost Rider or Blade comic, let alone a Spider-Man one. I'm Ewan, you're watching What Culture Comics, and here are the 10 most evil Spider-Man villains. Number 10. MINDWORM. This cranially abnormal supervillain made his debut in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man number 138, courtesy of Jerry Conway and Ross Andru, and though it's technically true he never sought to become a villain to begin with, and even ended his stint in the comics trying to reform, that doesn't make him any less terrifying. MINDWORM, real name William Turner, was born with a gigantic head and psionic powers, surviving by leeching the mental energy from those in his vicinity, like a more grotesque, lethal version of Colin Robinson from What We Do in the Shadows. Turner eventually encountered Spider-Man, but only by chance. He had propped himself up in an apartment building where he could leech the energy of his neighbors without them knowing, and one of those neighbors just so happened to be Peter's bully-turned-friend, Flash Thompson. MINDWORM tried to leech Peter's big brain energy shortly after he moved in with Flash. Parker's Spidey sense tipped him off though, and he was able to defeat MINDWORM by giving him a good bonk on the noggin, putting an end to his reign of terror on Flash and his fellow tenants. Folks will probably point out that MINDWORM deliberately stopped short of draining a lethal amount of his victims' energy, but equally, no one wants their brain juice nabbed after a hard day's work. Number 9. CARRION. CARRION is one of those Spidey adversaries who has actually gotten steadily more terrifying as the years have gone by, going from being just another clone of Miles Warren, the JACKAL, to an entire sentient virus that can possess people and turn them into zombified husks with homicidal tendencies. The CARRION virus has evolved a great deal since its first appearance in Spectacular Spider-Man number 149, going from being a biological weapon designed to wipe out humanity to a sort of vessel for Warren's personality, and then finally as a virus that emerged from Warren's clones that could then infect humans. The lattermost stage, or zombie variant, was by far the worst of the bunch though, turning its victims into rotting monsters with an insatiable bloodlust. Number 8. The JACKAL, Miles Warren. While one particular 90s retcon diminishes the JACKAL's overall influence, there's no denying this guy was a real piece of work. Initially a professor at Empire State University, Miles Warren developed an unhealthy obsession with one of his students, Gwen Stacy. Following Gwen's death at the hands of the Green Goblin, Warren decided that the sensible thing to do would be to apply his cloning research to real life, and use it to torment Spider-Man, who he held responsible for Stacy's murder. But Spidey wasn't the only victim of Warren. Cloning someone is bad enough, as it's a complete violation of the victim's privacy and autonomy, but especially when they're dead, which of course Gwen was. Factor in all the trauma these clones then inflicted on Gwen's loved ones, and then said loved ones having to deal with their own clones, and you have one of the most despicable characters in the Web-Slingers library. Number 7. Swarm. Introduced all the way back in 1977 by Bill Mantlo and John Byrne, Fritz von Meyer was one of the Third Reich scientists who fled to Europe following Germany's defeat in World War II. He travelled to South America where, upon encountering a mutated colony of bees, he was eaten alive. Rather than that being the end of the story though, the German scientist's mind melded with that of the colonies. From that point on, Fritz decided to rename himself Swarm and get up to all sorts of nasty business, using the bees not for good, but for evil. He's easily defeated each time he shows up, with his most hilarious one coming at the hands of Squirrel Girl, but the fact he continues to use one of the Earth's most wholesome creatures for his own personal gain is truly despicable. Number 6. The 1000. What's worse than a man made of a swarm of bees, you might ask? Why, a man made from a swarm of spiders, of course. Like, nothing against spiders or anything, they're just out here trying to chill, let's be honest, but they are nightmarish in the right context. For Spider-Man, said nightmarish context would come in the form of the 1000, one of the most infamous rogues in the Wallcrawler's gallery. The 1000, real name Carl King, is what you get when you hand Garth Ennis the keys to Spider-Man. King was another of Peter's bullies at high school, but one who actually witnessed his run-in with the radioactive spider. Seeing the gifts the arachnid had bestowed to Peter, King decided to do the normal thing and ate it, which led to less than wholesome results. Following the ingestion process, King's entire body became inhabited by a collective of spiders. The good news is that King only lasted another couple of issues before his death, but it's still safe to say he made one heck of an impression in the short time he was around. Number 5. Doppelganger. Mainstream audiences finally got a taste of the Marvel multiverse when Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse blasted us all in 2018, but not all alt-reality Spider-Men are as wholesome as they are there. No, Peter Parker is second only to Reed Richards when it comes to possessing a frightening number of scary alt-doppelgangers, the scariest of which is called Doppelganger. Created by Magus, himself an evil version of Adam Warlock during Infinity War, the sequel to Infinity Gauntlet, which saw Thanos snap away half the life in the universe, Doppelganger was a six-armed monster based upon Spider-Man's template. On the Nightmare Fuel scale, he lies somewhere in between the version of Peter we find at the beginning of the Six Arms saga and the man-spider he eventually develops into later in the arc. With a face like that, it's little wonder he became mates with Carnage. Number 4. Vermin. Vermin is something of a forgotten Spider-Man villain, despite featuring in one of the Warcrawler's most acclaimed tales, Kraven's Last Hunt by J.M. DeMatteis and Mike Zeck. The character is essentially just a mutated humanoid rat, only instead of raising a band of kick-ass Ninja Turtles to help save New York, he just abducts victims off the street and devours their flesh. But of course, Vermin wasn't always Vermin. To begin with, he was a scientist who worked for Baron Zemo, until one day he became the victim of their experiments. His mind and body were completely ruined by the incident, rendering him incapable of fighting his animalistic urges. Ultimately though, Vermin is a bit of a tragic character. His time at Ravencroft after suffering defeat at the hands of Spidey and Captain America did him a world of good, but his humanoid rat form just kept on finding a way back, which inevitably led to more terrifying fates for unsuspecting New Yorkers. Number 3. Morlun. Morlun may not have been around as long as some of Spidey's other villains, but he's managed to cram in a lot of terror within that time frame. Originally introduced during J. Michael Straczynski's starts out great but ends badly Spider-Man run, Morlun is a being who travels the multiverse searching for spider totems, which Peter was technically classed as. The ins and outs of the whole totem retcon are a tad convoluted and not worth getting into here, but the short version is that, on Earth 616, i.e. the main Marvel universe, Peter Parker encountered a man called Ezekiel who shared the same powers as he did. Rather than listening to Ezekiel, who warned Peter that Morlun was on his way and all he could do was hide, he decided to confront his new enemy and proceeded to get his ass spectacularly kicked. The web-slinger would have a number of confrontations with Morlun, who had already slayed numerous totems across the multiverse by this point, with one resulting in the loss of his eye, which Morlun then proceeded to eat. Even after being defeated, Morlun would resurface on several more occasions, ever more determined to vanquish all of the spider totems in one great hunt. Number 2. Carnage. Eddie Brock might have caused a lot of hurt when he first started out as Venom, but the symbiote is firmly in everyone's good books now, with multiple retcons having revealed how the Clintar, the name of their alien species, have been fighting the good fight ever since a chance encounter with the gods of Asgard showed them the way eons ago. So, how come Venom and Carnage were bad for so long? Well, the answer lies in their respective hosts. Venom felt spurned by Peter Parker when he decided to part ways with the symbiote, and was twisted even further by Brock's desire for revenge. When a part of Venom split off and bonded itself to notorious serial killer Cletus Cassidy, the cycle of evil was given another jolt and spiraled into something altogether more evil: Carnage. Carnage is undoubtedly the most sinister symbiote of all time, having already been a rotten piece of work even before he bonded with Venom's offspring. In the years since he gained his snazzy alien death suit, Cassidy has murdered countless more victims, famously going on to randomly massacre civilians and other symbiotes in the appropriately named Maximum Carnage event in the 90s, and getting up to a whole lot worse afterwards. And number 1. Norman Osborn. Spider-Man has the unique privilege of having several arch-foes. To many, Dr. Octopus will always be considered the Wallcrawler's greatest adversary. Others, who first encountered the character in the 80s and 90s, may beg to differ, and say that Venom deserves that slot, despite the character having been reformed in recent times. However, while both those characters are iconic Spidey villains, none have enacted as much torment on Peter Parker than Norman Osborn, the first Green Goblin. The arrival of the Green Goblin in The Amazing Spider-Man number 14 upped the threat level in the comic considerably, with Gobby always providing Peter with his most difficult challenges. Tragically, about 100 issues later, this back and forth took on an even deadlier dynamic, with Norman throwing Peter Parker's true love, Gwen Stacy, off the George Washington Bridge, which Stacy of course didn't survive. This one act alone would have made Norman one of Spider-Man's most evil adversaries, but to both the detriment of Spider-Man and Marvel's comics more generally, he didn't stop there. A retcon that came in the climax of the reviled Clone Saga comic revealed how Norman didn't perish in the aftermath of the Gwen Stacy affair. He had, in actuality, faked his death and proceeded to orchestrate an elaborate campaign to destroy Peter's life from top to bottom. Remember all the evil stuff that Miles Warren got up to? Well, that was all a part of Norman's master plan. All of it makes sense, but essentially all the evil cloning nonsense that the Jackal carried out can also be blamed on the Elder Osborn. The cherry on top of this horrendous trauma cake is that Goblin was also responsible for Mary Jane miscarrying her and Peter's child, just in case you thought things weren't despicable enough already. And those were the 10 most evil Spider-Man villains. Let me know your most evil Spidey villains down in the comments below, and be sure to drop the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe so you don't miss another upload going forward. I've been Ewan. You can catch more of me on Twitter if you want to, at EwanRuinsThings, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Bye!